أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum. We have previously talked about the differences between the old classic Arabic spoken 1500 years ago by the Arabs in Mecca, and in that regard we had discussed many different examples, and so we have finished that topic. And what we're going to do today is we are going to talk about another aspect of the language of the Quran, which is of utmost importance as well, and that is the clarity of the language. Okay, that's the clarity of the language. So let's get started with some of our reading. The Quran has not merely been revealed in Arabic, it has been revealed in eloquent Arabic. The word eloquent is something that is explained in the next sentence. So what is that? The language is clear and cogent, meaning it's logical, it makes a lot of sense, and there's no vagueness in it. Okay, so the word, every word is unambiguous, and every style adopted is well known to its addressee. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran talks about the Quran, the property of the Quran, and he says, Nazala bihi ruhul amin, the trustworthy spirit. Who is that? Archangel Gabriel, right? Jibreel alayhi salam. He has brought down this Quran. Ala kalbika, upon your heart, litakuna min al munzirin, so that you may be among the warners. Warners to who? Who is he going to warn? He is going to warn the people of the Quraysh, right? That's what his primary addressee are. These are the people he has been sent to. Bilisanin Arabiyyin Mubin, in a clear Arabic language. So that's the first thing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the Quran, is being in simple, clear Arabic language. Clear Arabic language, right? Now, if somebody were to delve into the Arab literature, if somebody were to read their poetry, their prose, whatever literature they have at that point in time, they would see this and appreciate this difference immediately. And that difference is that the Quran, unlike many of those literature sources, is in very clear language, is in very plain language. Okay, so that's an important fact to understand. It's, in fact, if we use the word concise for it. What does the word concise mean? To explain a big idea, explain a very hard idea into very few words, very simple words. Okay, so that's something we have to always keep in mind. In fact, if people were to review that literature, they would be surprised on how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about what he wants to talk about so simply. And one would say, when, oh, something can be said so simply as well, that's unbelievable. So the language is clear and cogent, and there's no vagueness in it. It's the words Allah uses in the Quran, they're not vague to the people who listen to it. Okay, and all the styles, all the different literary styles that are being spoken are also very clear. Another ayah that the author has chosen in this regard, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the Quran. Quranan Arabiyan ghayra zi iwaj la'allahum tattaqun. He talks about the Quran. Allah says that it is free from any ambiguity. Ghayra zi iwaj, it is non-crooked. Like, do you see this road? It is crooked. You know, there's no crookedness in any of the words or sentences of the Quran. They're very clear. They're very plain. And why is that? لَعَلَّهُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that they may save themselves, right? Taqwa, they may develop taqwa. So if we were to believe what we just read, if we were to admit this fact, then we will reach a very important conclusion, and that conclusion is, this is an obvious reality about Quran. If this premise is accepted, then it must be conceded, it must be accepted, that no word used or style adopted by the Quran is rare or unknown. Okay, and the word that we use for this is called shaz. Okay, so there are no shaz words, there are no rare words, there are no unknown words in the Quran. All the words that Quran chose to speak to the Arab, to speak to the Quraysh, the people who were listening to Prophet ﷺ directly, all of those words were well known to them. They didn't have to go and necessarily pick up a dictionary to understand what does this word mean. Or today Prophet ﷺ claimed that he had some ayahs revealed on him, and I didn't understand three of those words. I didn't understand them because those words we don't speak in our language, right? Right? So that's the kind of thing that Quran does not use. Quran does not use any kind of unfamiliar words to its audience. So that's an important thing to understand. Now, when we say unfamiliar, we're talking about unfamiliar to the audience, not necessarily unfamiliar to you and me, right? Because you and I were not born 1500 years ago. We did not grow up speaking that language. We speak today's Arabic. We speak other languages of today, and first we have to learn Arabic, right? And so if you were to learn today's Arabic, that may not necessarily fully equip you to be able to learn, to understand that particular spoken language spoken 1500 years ago. That's an important thing we have already talked about many, many times in this series. So what I'm saying is that once you learn to Arab literature, to their poetry, to their other literature that we have available today, once you learn that particular Arabic spoken 1500 years ago, then none of the words of the Quran should be unfamiliar to you, okay? All of those words will be familiar to you, okay? So there is no such words used in the Quran that are rare from its primary audience. Who are its primary audience? The Quraysh. So that they would have to pick up a dictionary or be confused by its meaning. And one word I searched for, if I were to tell you, well, this is a dendron, would you understand that? Would it be easy to understand what I mean unless I show you the picture, right? So this word, I would like to tell you, this is a tree, right? But the word I chose for this is saying that this is a dendron. Quran doesn't do that. Quran, sometimes in our literature, in our language, in our poetry, in our books, even these days, just to be a little exotic, just to sound more knowledgeable, just to remove monotony, we would use very exotic, difficult words sometimes. Words which the primary listener may not be familiar with. Okay? But Quran doesn't do that. If it's a tree, Quran will tell you it's a tree. Alright? Alright, this is an important principle. Because sometimes what has happened in understanding the different verses, the different sentences in the Quran, people didn't accept the most common meaning. And we will look at some of those examples. And when they didn't accept those meanings because they didn't understand the sentence, when you put that most common meaning, it doesn't make sense to them. And so then they started to look for really unfamiliar meanings to be able to explain that sentence. We'll look at some examples soon. Before we do that, I want to tell you that most languages, or most of any language, consists of vocabulary, consists of words that the audience is familiar with. Okay, most of the words are like that. So 90% of the words, let's say, for example, in any language would be simple, consistently mean just one thing. Okay, and the person, whenever they listen to it, they understand. Like he went, or he goes, or he runs. When you listen to the sentence, he walks, you don't think of, oh, he's climbing, do you? The word walking can only mean one thing, right? In fact, if somebody would tell you he walks versus he jogs, you understand the difference. You understand the difference between those two things, and that's quite simple and straightforward. But then there could be unfamiliar words in any language. In any language, there could be unfamiliar words. And we are not talking about the kind of unfamiliar words, for example, that only one group of people in a community would know. For example, doctors like to use a lot of medical words, right? They are still English words. For example, hypertension. Now, maybe a person who is a cook doesn't know what hypertension is, right? Or anybody who is a lawyer may not know what a hypertension is, right? Or they don't understand that thing. That's not what I'm talking about when it comes to unfamiliar words in the Quran. I'm talking about a word that is unfamiliar to everybody. Nobody knows that word. So Quran would avoid any such word which is unfamiliar to everybody. All right. The second category of things, of words in any language is the words with multiple meaning. Right? So for example, if I were to ask you, Donnie, I want a bat. Right? What am I talking about? Am I talking about a cricket bat, a baseball bat, or am I talking about the bat, the bird?
I don't know.
Right? You don't know. So how would you find out? You would find out by looking at the context, looking at the other sentences in my conversation with you before and after. And based on that, you would assess what is it that I want. Am I in the middle of the Papua New Guinea jungle? And when I say to you, I want a bat, I'm probably not wanting this bat. I'm probably wanting this bat maybe, right? But if I'm on a cricket field, and I ask you for a bat, please don't give me this bat because it's useless to me, right? So some words have many meanings. But here's the thing, important thing. They're both familiar, isn't it? If I were to tell you that this bat, the bird, is also the meaning of bat, you would be like, yeah, sure, I know that. I already know that, right? I already know that bat is also an animal and it's also a sports equipment. These are both familiar words, and that's not what I mean by unfamiliar either. Okay, so that's an important thing to understand. The third category of words is there are words with layers of meaning in it. For example, in the Quran, there's meaning ayah, right? Everybody has heard the word ayah. And ayah means what? Sign. That's the most comprehensive meaning. But sometimes in the Quran, the word ayah is used to describe the signs of Allah in nature, right? So we would be describing the sky as an ayah, the earth as an ayah, your whole body as an ayah. Sometimes the word ayah could be referred to as the sign that lead to Allah in other ways. And sometimes the word ayah is the verse of the Quran, because when you read the verse of the Quran, it actually leads you where? It leads you to Allah, right? It leads you to your Creator. And so ayah would mean that as well. And sometimes it could mean a miracle. Like for example, Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, he put a stick on the river and it split, right? That's also an ayah. That's a sign of Allah. So all of these things at some point in time mean in generally sign, but it could also be used. I could say the ayah of the Quran. I could say the ayah that happened to Musa alayhi salam. Correct? And you guys will not be confused. So that's a word which has layers of meaning in it. And then there are these synonyms. So for example, if you want to say beautiful, you could say gorgeous, you could say stunning, you could say handsome. All of these are alike words, right? They're similar words, alike words. So when you are reading the Quran or you're reading any literature, any book, you recognize the word, but you can't decide if the word is used in its general meaning, like the word ayah, like a sign, or if it's used in a specific meaning, the verses of Quran, the miracle, right? Or just the general signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the world. Is it one or the other meaning that is being referred to? Just like I told you about the example of a bat the animal, or bat the sports bat. Similarly, I found a crane, right? When you think about the crane, what comes to your mind? There is the crane, which is the heavy equipment, right? You use it for construction. And then there's the crane, which is the bird, right? So I found the crane, you have to then explain it. And as a reader, when you find a word which has different meanings in the Quran, you have to then recognize what it means. And how do you recognize? Based on the context, based on how it is used. And sometimes Two words are used, identically words are used in the same sentence. Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. It comes from the same root. And then you are asking yourself this question, is that why are these two things which are similar mentioned together? Are they similar together because it's writing style? Or are they there to explain something, to highlight a different meaning between the two? Okay? I'm going to take a small little segue here and try to talk about something which is called ghareeb words. If, inshallah, at some point in time in your lives, when you guys will study Quran in more detail, and you guys will try to understand the word of Allah, you will come across these books written. And these books will be entitled like Al-Mufradat fi Ghareeb al-Quran. Ghareeb means unfamiliar. Ghareeb means unfamiliar word, okay? And so this is Imam Raghib, he wrote this book. And then you would read that book and you'd be like, Brother Abbas, you said that there is no unfamiliar words in the Quran, but there are people who are Islamic scholars who have written books like the unfamiliar words of Quran. So what does that mean? So these books are actually written with the point of view of the non-speakers of the Arabic language. Because when Quran was revealed, it didn't just limit itself to the primary audience. Later on, the Iranians would learn it, the Syrians would learn it, people from the Lebanon, the subcontinent, all over the world, people would learn it, right? So now, for those people, whatever they have learned is familiar with them, and whatever they have not learned is unfamiliar, ghareeb for them. So from their point of view, what are the most common words that they should know? That's what these books are trying to explain, okay? So if you were to come across these things, don't be confused. So the question is, does Quran use unfamiliar words? We reviewed two ayahs and they tell us no. Quran should not be using any unfamiliar words to its audience. Yet you may come across these narrations in hadith where people would say that Hazrat Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, when he reviewed this, heard this ayah, وَفَاكِهَةً وَآبَا. So he didn't know the meaning of Aba. Alright, so that's just a bogus narration. These things are not real. Or Fatir as-samawati wal ard. You may find a narration where it says many of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ didn't understand or know the meaning of Fatir. That's not true. These things are not necessarily based on truth. Why am I saying that they're not true? Because when you do research, they do not fulfill the criterion on which we judge different narrations. Okay. So its words and styles are well known and conventionally understood by its addressee. Okay. No aspect of the language has any peculiarity or rarity in it. Quran is not trying to be a piece of literature where it uses exotic language just to make a rhyme sound good, right? Sometimes when you're trying to create a poetry, you want to make this last word rhyme with the other sentence, right? Next verse. Quran does that, but it doesn't use any kind of exotic word for that people are not familiar with it. All right. So, consequently, while interpreting Quran, the conventionality understood and known meanings of the word should be taken into consideration. So this is an important principle. You are going to come across different tafasir of the Quran, different translations of the Quran, different meanings of its words. So when you listen to that, the first question you should be asked yourself is, was this meaning of this word commonly known to its audience? Right? That's how you should be doing it, right? That's how you should be understanding that. Apart from that, no interpretation is acceptable. So how do you decide that? How do you decide? Because I may tell you that the meaning of a word is written in the Arabic dictionary, and I may tell you, although this meaning is written in the Arabic dictionary, this was not the most familiar meaning of this word 1500 years ago. On another situation, I may tell you a word in Arabic, Quranic Arabic, and its meaning is not even mentioned in the dictionary. But that was the most familiar meaning for those people that was there. How do you know this? How would you know this? You know this when you have reviewed the literature from that period of time. When you have reviewed the poetry and the prose, then it automatically will come at you. You will automatically understand this. So let's review an example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Rahman, وَالنَّجْمُ وَالشَّجَرُ يَسْجُدَانِ. What is Najm? Can somebody tell me the meaning of Najm? Stars, right? What is Shajar in Arabic? Tree, right? Yasjudan means to prostrate, to do sajda, right? And so, one of the difficulties that people faced when they reviewed this ayah, when they heard this ayah, was if you were to translate it as the stars and the trees are prostrating before who? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? They are prostrating before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does that even mean? What does trees have to do with the stars? Is there anything common between the stars and the trees? Well, that doesn't make any sense, does it? Stars are in the sky, trees are on the ground. There's really nothing much similar between them. And so this was their mental difficulty. The people who tried to understand this ayah, it was their mental difficulty. They wanted to solve this because they couldn't understand, they couldn't make the relationship between these two elements clear. So how did they approach it? Well, they said, if you use najm as verb, because we know the noun najm means stars. If you use najm as verb, the verb najm means to blow or to scatter. Okay? And when you use it like that, well, maybe if we make a noun from that meaning of the verb, then it would mean maybe something like a scattered root or a scattered branch or something like a herb. Like you see all these small little brush and bush, etc., right? Okay? Maybe that's what it means. Maybe the meaning here, because you see the difficulty now, people are reading this ayah later on. They're not the primary audience, obviously. These people are like born 200 years, 300, 400 years later, and they're reviewing this and they're like, وَالنَّجْمُ وَالشَّجَرُ يَسْجُدَانِ. Maybe it means that the herbs and trees are prostrating before Allah. Well, it makes a lot of sense because all of them belong to the plants category, right? They are all species of plants. And that made most sense to them. But there's a problem, isn't it? The meaning of the word najm, the most common meaning of the word najm is what? Stars. Right? Even many people, even if they don't know Arabic, they know that the meaning of the word najm is stars. And there is tons of other words Quran could have used for herbs. Why didn't it? That's the first question that comes to mind. So sometime what happens of what I told you, that the verb najm means to blow and scatter, and then they made a noun from it, and then that's something called coining a meaning. Okay, coining a meaning. What's called qiyas. So for example, there was no film industry before, right? Film industry is a recent 100, 200 years a thing where you have a camera and you have a producer, you have an actor, you have a choreographer. So how are Arabs going to name things in their language? How are they going to, because there's no word that exists for film. So what they're going to do is they're going to take the English word film, fa-la-ma, and they're going to start making words from it. So for example, they will make mufallim, or they will make taflim or tafallum, right? Now all of these things will start sounding a little bit different, and they will start meaning different things. And that's how the creation of words start to happen. Does that make sense? And how did we learn that tafallum, taflim? Because we do that to other words in Arabic, right? People have historically done that. So zaraba, zarib, mazrub, right? That's how you make words. And this process is called qiyas. Now, is it possible that you made qiyas about a word and you decided that najam, from najam you could create a word which would mean harb, and now it becomes famous? 200 years later, maybe that word is understood in the meaning of harb by everybody. Similarly, now you know what taflim means. Everybody know what taflim means, right? But the question is, when the Quran was revealed to its primary audience, did the word najm mean herb, or did it mean star? Does that make sense? And that's the journey you have to take. That's the journey you have to take. And when you take that journey, you understand that najm could not have meant herb at all. In fact, the only thing it can mean is star. Now, you would ask this question then, if it doesn't mean herb, well, how do you explain the ayah? Remember, people had this difficulty understanding the meaning of the ayah? وَالنَّجْمُ وَالشَّجَرُ يَسْجُدَانِ. What does star have to do with the trees? Why did we start to make changes in the meaning of the words, or start to look for unfamiliar meanings of the different words? Because we couldn't understand. We couldn't understand the meaning of the sentence when we applied the most familiar meanings to it. So what do we do that? Because when we don't accept the meaning of najm as herb, we still have to explain the meaning of the ayah. All right? So we will contemplate on that. We will think what is the relationship between the stars and the trees. We will think about that for a long time. But what we can absolutely not do is change the meaning. Change the meaning of the words so that things would make some sense to us. Does that make sense? And sometimes trying to discover the relationship between two things will take centuries. It can take centuries, right? People for the longest time believed that the sun revolved around the earth. It took centuries of time to understand that's not the case, right? So it can take a long period of time for us to understand the meaning of different relationships between different things. But we will not change the meaning, the most familiar meaning of something, just because it doesn't make sense to us. Does that make sense? Good. So what is this thing? وَالنَّجْمُ وَالشَّجَرُ يَسْجُدَانِ. The stars and the trees both prostrate themselves before Allah. What does it mean? This is a literary style, that is being referred to. And Hassan Islahi, one of the famous scholars in Tadabbur al-Quran, he said that we are painting a picture of a desert. And when you look at this, when you imagine yourself, all of you can close your eyes and imagine yourself being in a desert, and what do you see? You see the sky at night. What do you see in the sky? You see the stars. And when you look down, what do you see? You see the trees. And all tree and land, that's all the trees, right? So when Allah says, in your point of view, whatever you're looking at, if you look, what you're seeing is you're seeing everything from the sky all the way to the ground. Everything is prostrating before Allah. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to tell. Does that make sense? That's the picture He is trying to paint. And when you and it just looked a very simple explanation from me to tell you that, right? What that means. But it obviously bothered people. They couldn't imagine that situation. And because of that, they had to go on this cycle of invention to make sense of the ayahs. Any question about this? So, بِلِسَانٍ عَرَبِيٍّ مُبِينٍ, Quran is revealed in clear language, clear Arabic language, And we will not accept unclear meanings or rare meanings, unfamiliar meanings that were unfamiliar to the primary audience, or the primary listeners. Now, in any language, there are these abandoned words. If I were to tell you that before this, what is this thing called?
Asparagus.
Asparagus. This thing was called sparrowgrass. Would you believe me? If I were to ask you, go get me 2 pounds of sparrowgrass, you'd be like, what are you talking about? Similarly, if I were to tell you that, what do you think about when you hear the word hamburger?
A hamburger.
You think of a place. Hamburger is a burger, but Hamburg, do you think of, when you hear the word Hamburg, do you think of hamburger? Right? No, right? So, that was the original word for burger. But through time, after many decades and centuries later, those words have evolved into what we call asparagus now and burger now, or hamburger, right? But in their origin, those words were very different. Those words were very different. Okay? Now, if you were to revive a human being who lived in England 400 years ago, and he is now asking you for asparagus, will he use the word asparagus? No, he will say, give me sparrowgrass. And you'll be looking at him, and then you will catch a sparrow, and you'll put it on some grass, and make a sandwich for him, and say, this is your sparrowgrass. Right? So, this is something that happens in languages all the time. Like if you were to be like born 200 years ago or 300 years ago, and old English, and this is how you would sleep. Let thy step be slow and steady. What does that mean? Let thy step be slow and steady. So this thou, teen, thigh, what does this mean? This is the old way of the second person pronoun, you, right? When you're talking about you, the second person pronoun, that would be the word for that, right? But we don't use it. Today, do we use this? That's how you speak to your friend? Why don't thou play with me on PS4? Is that what you say to your friends? No, right? Okay, so these are abandoned words. These are no longer familiar to the people who live here. And this has not happened to the Quran. All of the words that are used by the Quran are very familiar, are very, very familiar to them, because even after that much of time. Now, different meanings of those words, because the words can have many different meanings, may be less commonly known, maybe still be less commonly known, as we have discussed heavily about the word kitab, right? We talked about the word kitab and what it actually meant to the listeners and how it was misinterpreted. Let's listen to another example. Another example is this one, very interesting example. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن قَبْلِكَ مِن رَسُولٍ وَلَا نَبِيٍّ. We have not sent a prophet or a nabi before, إِلَّا إِذَا تَمَنَّى, except that whenever he would desire something, أَلْقَى الشَّيْطَانُ فِي أُمْنِيَّتِهِ, that the Satan or Shaitan would meddle with his desire. Does it make sense? Does it make sense, the translation so far? فَيَنْسَخُ اللَّهُ مَا يُلْقِ الشَّيْطَانُ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will cancel that meddling from Shaitan. That's the word, that's the meaning of this. So, now, when we look at the meaning of the word tamanna, as has been present here, underlined here, right? Tamanna is the same tamanna that you and I use in Urdu and Hindi. This is the same tamanna jo kabhi bar nahi aati, right? Same tamanna, same desire. And the problem happened because of a narration, all right? And that narration is very interesting and most likely a false narration. Truly, probably is a false narration. Okay? Yeah, and this is quite very interesting. So that narration caused the confusion when understanding this ayah, and because of that confusion, people changed the meanings of the words in the ayah from what was most familiar words, meanings, they changed them to something very real. Let's see what happens. So the story goes like this: that Prophet ﷺ was receiving the revelation of Surah Najm in the Kaaba. He was in the Kaaba, and Surah Najm was being revealed. And after a few ayahs, Shaitan came, and Jibreel alayhi salam was telling Prophet ﷺ ayahs, and so was Shaitan. Do you believe this? So this is the Surah Najm, right? So then the ayahs goes like this: لَقَدْ رَأَى مِنْ آيَاتِ رَبِّهِ الْكُبْرَى. He certainly saw some of the signs of the Lord. أَفَرَأَيْتُمْ لَاتَ وَالْعُزَّى. Have you seen Lat and Uzza? What is Lat and Uzza? These are their gods. The people there in the Kaaba, there were many gods, right? They had put in many idols, and they used to worship them. And there were names, or these are the famous names of some of them. Afaraitum Lata wal Uzza. Have you seen Lat and Uzza? Wa Manat as-Salisat al-Ukhra. And the third one is Manat. So Lat, Uzza, and Manat are the names of those idols. Okay? And then the commentary of the Quran is Alakumus Zakaru Walahul Unsa. You for yourself, you like to have boys. In those days, people would like to have more sons than daughters, because sons could protect them when they would fight with another tribe, etc. People did not want to have daughters. It's the unfortunate reality of that time. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is criticizing them, that you think that Lat and Uzza and Manat, they are my daughters. You think that they are, na'uzubillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's daughters. For you yourself, you want boys. But when it comes to me, you want to say that these are my daughters. Like, look at your own, look at your own, what you're doing, you know. This is just a kind of sarcastic way of kind of trying to refute what they're trying to say. Obviously, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not have any daughters. In hiya illa asma'u sammaytumuha. These idols are merely names that you and your forefathers have made up. These are not real. Obviously, that is the case. But when وَمَنَاتُ الثَّلَاثَةُ الْأُخْرَى, Prophet ﷺ received this revelation, this is the narration. Then Shaitan came, and the Shaitan says, Tilka غَرَانِيكَ الْعَالَى وَأَنْ شَفَاتَيْنِ لَتُرْجَى. These are gods of great stature, and it is most hopeful that their shafa, their reference, will be counted. That's the added ayah, na'uzubillah, that Shaitan put in there. Okay, so somehow people found this narration, and then they had this ayah, the ayah we reviewed before, and they were like, وَمَا الرَّسُولِ وَالنَّبِيِّ إِلَّا إِذَا تَمَنَّى أَلْقَى الشَّيْطَانُ مِنْ أُمْنِيَّتِهِ. And they were like, oh, this is what Quran is talking about. Quran is saying that when Prophet or Nabi was sent before you, before human beings, it would happen that whatever was recited, whenever he recited the revelation, they changed the meaning of tamanna. I told you the meaning of tamanna. Tamanna is desire or wishing, right? They changed the meaning to fit in this story that we just heard about this addition of the ayah. They changed the meaning of the word tamanna, and they said, oh, if you were to look at the meaning of tamanna from this particular verse of poetry from that era, and from this particular verse, and this is where it's used. The word tamanna can also be used as recitation. To try to fit in this story, they're changing the meaning of the most commonly understood meaning of the word. Most commonly understood meaning of the word at that time, and still is desire. And they changed the meaning so that this story would fit into this. Do you see now what has happened? Like almost a disaster has happened. Right? Does it make sense? Like, you could question a lot of things. Like, Na'uzubillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unable to protect His revelation. That His revelation is so simple and so easily interfered by other people that people like Shaitan or Satan can just come and interfere with it anytime they want. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has to make a special effort to actually cancel out those ayahs. The whole integrity of the Risala, the whole integrity of Nabuwa, everything is just like a question here, isn't it? The whole process is big question mark to that now, if you were to accept this narration. And what happened here? Because they tried to change the meaning of tamanna to a common meaning. Does that make sense? These two examples should be understood. Now, so what is the meaning of this ayah then? The meaning is simple. Whenever a prophet had desired or aimed to achieve his goals to further the religion of Allah, Allah has made them prophet. They want to do good for Allah. They want to spread the message. And in this, they have made some scheme, or they have made a goal or do something. Then Shaitan tries to stop them, those prophets, from achieving those goals. And what does Allah do? He removes those hurdles. That's the simple meaning. That's the simple meaning. So let's spend a minute or two here of why these things happen. Why these things happen? These things happen when we settle for less. Okay? When we are understanding the Quran, we should never settle for less. We shouldn't just pick something that makes any sense. We should pick the meaning that makes the best sense, that makes the most perfect sense in that particular context. And people, they had this particular narration at their hand of the satanic verses, and they were looking at this ayah, and they was like, oh, maybe that's what it means, because I have this story, and maybe let's change the meaning of the words of the Quran so that it will make sense to us. Does that make sense? Thank you very much for your attention. I'm going to pick it up from here. Inshallah, the next session is going to be the last one on this topic of the clear language or the eloquent language of the Quran. I'm happy to take any questions. Jazakumullah khair. Please spread the word. Please have your friends or whoever you want to invite to these sessions. This is a very important effort, because in this time and age where the whole idea of religion is at question, we need to let people know about the truth of the message of Allah. And we cannot do that if we were to just accept things on the face value without research. So any kind of literary work, any kind of research work should be applauded, and people should know more about it. Why? It will result in more faith. That people would be more proud of their faith. They will be able to spread the message of Islam in their own lives and act by the message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent, and you will be more confident about it. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you for your attention. Okay, go ahead.